Why vote? I said we vote because of the blood oath that's been spilled for our past leaders and ancestors who have all been killed, to fight for a right that we as humans deserve. That's a reason why I vote, but it's only the first. Why vote? You should vote if you care about your community. I mean, look at your everyday life and tell me, what do you see? Please have mercy on me. Why vote? Is it a perfect place full of peace, love, and positivity? Or are there some problems that can be solved and room for more productivity? Most people hear the word vote and think of a U.S. president, when in reality that position for us is irrelevant. Do you know about state representatives, governors, mayors, or city council members, attorney generals, sheriffs, judges, and local commissioners? See, there are many positions of power we all have a power to impact. But the true reason why we are enslaved is within us, and that's a fact. Please have mercy on me. Please have a little mercy on me. Why vote? Why vote? I vote because I'm black.
Wake up, wake up. Yeah. It's that time, y'all. Good morning. You got your coffee? Tea? What you sipping on? Welcome to the dark side of education. We live on Justice for the Cities and Citizen Ed, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, wherever y'all tuning that from. Appreciate you. Whichever platform is your favorite, we glad that you're here. How y'all doing this morning? I know for me, it's been a long week, long days. It's hard to keep up with these days, but Sunday's always a day where we get it popping. And again, you're tuning into the dark side of education. I'm your host, Rashad Turner. It's one of them weeks in Minnesota where you just, education is jacked up here, y'all. And I think it sort of seeps into all of our systems, affects our children in many different ways. You know, and they say Minnesota, it's the land of 10,000 lakes, right? And I say there's 10 times as many of our children who can't read, right? Thousands of children in lakes of ineffective teacher tiers across the state of Minnesota. Ineffective teacher tiers, right? We have a lot of those up here. Ineffective teachers. And what do I mean by that? There's a lot, right? There's a lot that goes into what makes an ineffective teacher. There's many different ways to be an ineffective teacher, to be ineffective in your teaching. Now some people are going to say, well, he's never been a teacher, right? He's never been a teacher. He doesn't have a clue what he's talking about. But let me remind folks, I've worked in public schools and I had a front row seat, right? A front row seat, and got to see that there were no children who looked like me in the front row of the classroom, all right? Well, I guess there's always that one chair, or y'all know that chair or that desk that just sits right next to the teacher's desk. That one always seems to be reserved for one of us. Have you ever noticed that? You walk into a classroom, no Native American children in the front row, no Latinate children in the front row, no African American children in the front row. I hope y'all got y'all's coffee, all right? But no African American children in the front row. And why? That's because that's not where the teacher believes they should be. All right. All that work we did to sit in the front of the bus, and our children are still in the back of the classroom. Ineffective teachers. The soft bigotry of low expectations And that's what I want to get into this morning. And I'm not going to give ineffective teachers a pass, but I am going to zoom out a bit and get into the narratives that lead to that scenario that I just described, right? But before I get into that, have you heard, right? I said every week something is popping here in Minnesota. And this week, and if you think back to the beginning of the COVID, we sort of talked about this or covered this maybe earlier on this year. But at the beginning of COVID, Minnesota high school children who lost their jobs due to COVID weren't granted any type of relief, right? But this past week, Minnesota high school children who lost their jobs due to COVID won a huge battle. And what was that battle? The battle to get some bread, just like everybody else who was impacted by COVID and by losing their jobs. Now, when COVID hit, the high schoolers were left hanging, y'all. Left hanging, left out in the cold. They worked their jobs, paid their taxes, just like those of us who are fortunate enough to have jobs and pay taxes. They did all of that. And when they lost their jobs, there was no help. No help from the systems that we have grown accustomed to depending on, that seem to let us down every single time. But there was no help. And the children were pissed off, and rightfully so. But I give these students, these children, their props because they didn't stop at being pissed off. No, they didn't stop there, right? It's easy, especially here in Minnesota. You know, it's one thing, and I think it's easy to create that awareness, right? You get pissed off at something, you create that awareness. And a lot of folks here in Minnesota, whether it's high schoolers not getting the support they need, whether it's when someone is murdered by the police, folks will get pissed off, create some awareness, but then they get back to their regularly scheduled programming, right? Not these youth. They got informed, they got organized, and they took action. And that's major because a lot of things are going to pop up that piss us off. But what are we going to do about it, right? So last week, because of the actions that these students took, along with some support from Youth Prize, last week, the Minnesota Appeals Court ruled the high school children were right when they said they deserved that money. They should get that bread. They said the children were right and that the Minnesota deed being the Department of Employment and Economic Development, was wrong. They were wrong in denying the kids that federal unemployment compensation. Now, thankfully, these youth got organized, right? They got the information they needed to be able to do something. But then also there's an organization here in Minneapolis called Youth Prize, right? They partnered with the students and helped them build this campaign that led to this change. But unfortunately, and I might have my days off here a little bit, but I think it's been 4, 5, 6 days since the ruling was made. And when I look on the Department of Deed website, I don't see these changes reflected. So obviously the fight goes on, right? But how often, you know, our Attorney General, Keith Ellison, he said the deed was wrong. He said the state was wrong. And how often do you see attorney generals publicly come out and say, hey, these folks were wrong. It's time to right this wrong. And he did that. But I want to dive into this some more, and we're going to get to the soft, you know, bigotry of low expectations. Don't worry. We're going to get to that. But I want to dive into this some more. So I'm bringing on, and luckily this guy was up, right? Sometimes it's hard to get people to wake up this early, but I'm bringing on my guy, Marcus Pope. He's a VP over at Youth Prize. Good morning, Marcus. How you doing, brother? You still on mute too. There you go.
Good morning, Rashad. Sorry about that. Thanks for having me. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir. So how you doing this morning, brother?
I'm doing well. I'm doing well. Thanks for standing up for young people, all your work, standing up for equity and education and trying to push us to be better here in Minnesota. Appreciate everything you're doing.
Hey, that's what we got to do, right? We all got our lanes, but I think the more we support each other, we get to that point that we're going to. So I appreciate you for doing what you do and what y'all do over at Youth Prize. I mean, it's not often that organizations step up in this type of way to support our youth, right? We hear about a lot of different things that happen, a lot of different things that go on about our children, but usually those things aren't happening with our children, right? So if you could just sort of, give the audience an overview of what happened back when COVID hit, what took place after that. Just give us an overview and we'll roll from there, Marcus.
Okay. So just a quick little bit about Youth Prize. Our mission is to increase equity with and for Minnesota's Indigenous, low-income, and racially diverse youth. I think our president, Wokiwia, said it best in a recent article. We'll jump in the fire for young people to make sure that their needs are met in our community, and that's what we're about. So early on, it wasn't Youth Prize bringing this issue to the forefront. It was young people coming to us saying, hey, look, we're dealing with COVID. We've lost our wages. We've lost our jobs, and we're not eligible for benefits. And so we started out early. We gave a small grant. One of our tools for making a difference in the community is providing funding. So we gave a small grant to an organization called Bridge Makers, which is led by a young man by the name of Walter. I think you've maybe seen him in the news, ads, everything, talking about this issue. A small grant just to spread the word, collect stories from young people impacted, and to build momentum. As we gave that funding, we also said, hey, look, let us know what else we can do to support you. So we just stood behind making connections with adults, with folks in government, to get folks to listen and to hear the issues of young people in our community. We work to support them in the state legislature. So a lot of our work early on was in the state legislature, trying to get bipartisan support for a fix to this, trying to find alternative funding strategies. We always believe that the federal benefits apply to young people and that Dee's interpretation of the Federal CARES Act PUA program was the wrong interpretation. But, you never want litigation to be your first strategy. So as we talk to young people, we took it one step at a time. So we introduced bills in the Senate, which is led by Republicans. We introduced bills in the House led by Democrats. Everybody was, in support of young people, but we couldn't come to a solution because of gridlock and because of, just everything going on. Nothing moved this past session, and this was one of the victims of that. But still, as everybody felt like this is something that should change, we didn't see any real change happen and any real, like you talk about it, any bread in the pockets of young people. And so that's what we were concerned about. And so we kept pushing. Over the summer, we secured some funding from the WW Foundation to hire, I think it was like 20 young people at $16 an hour to do more grassroots advocacy, mobilization, social media marketing around this issue to get the word out.
Let me pause you real quick, Marcus, because I heard you say something. One of the things that at Minnesota Parent Union, one of the things we value is folks' time, right? And you just said that instead of, having 20 youth volunteer, right? Because this is so important, y'all should volunteer. You actually compensated them for their time. And I just want to give y'all's props for that, right?
Yeah, absolutely. That's what it's about. Young people need resources, and so many of the young people that were hired as a part of this Minnesota Young Champions project had lost their jobs, lost their wages due to COVID. And so this was a funding source for them to stand up and address the issues impacting them. Because we believe the people most impacted are the ones with the best solutions because they're impacted. They know what's up. Exactly. So So we did that. We worked with our congressional delegation to try to get federal legislation clarification around the PUA Act. That didn't work. And so we reached a point where our last resort was to file this lawsuit. We started out in federal court and filed in federal court. We worked closely with, and I love that you gave a huge shout out to our Attorney General, Keith Ellison, who was courageous, who stood on the right side of history and justice for young people, for the people of Minnesota.
Oh, yeah.
We worked with his office to move the lawsuit from, they felt it was most appropriate in the Minnesota Court of Appeals. So we moved the lawsuit to the Minnesota Court of Appeals. We negotiated for expedited review because we know that the CARES Act, it's time sensitive. The benefits run out. And I'd love to talk a little bit about that before we close.
Absolutely.
Now, young people need to apply by December 25th to preserve the right to benefits, regardless of what the Deeds website says. But we moved it to the Court of Appeals, expedited review. After the case moved to the Court of Appeals, we received a huge boost when the AG's office filed that amicus brief in support of our case, which was it was remarkable.
Now, what was the pushback, going back to when COVID hit through the time y'all had to file this lawsuit? What was the pushback from the legislature?
Well, I think some people don't understand that young people are helping to support their families with their wages. So you have one situation where people think, oh, this is just about entertainment. This is just about pocket change for young people. But folks like Cole and his peers and Walter, they're supporting their families. They're sending money to their parents and, to help them make it. So that's one issue. They don't understand that, young people work to meet their basic needs.
Right.
That shouldn't matter because employers pay into the unemployment system on behalf of young workers, just like they do every other workers. But
Exactly.
It's this situation where people don't value the contributions that young people make to their households, to themselves, and how they support themselves through college and so forth. So that's one piece. I think there were also different perspectives about how you pay for young people having benefits. So that was our biggest issue. For me, I don't care where you get the money from. Young people deserve it. They need it. But that was a real issue within the legislature around different sides thinking who should pay, where the resources should come from. And a lot of those political hiccups get in the way of young people and people getting what they need. So that was another major issue. And then we're just dealing with so much polarization and gridlock where, you can't get anything done. People don't understand that. And it's sad that so many things have to go to the courts to be resolved when we have lawmakers who actually they're lawmakers. They have an ability to make laws, repeal laws. So we wanted our lawmakers to be lawmakers and to solve this issue. If it's a 1939 law that is preventing young people from receiving benefits, let's change that 1939 law so young people receive benefits. We will be working on that in 2021. But that was the major issue that led to the interpretation where young people weren't even eligible for these federal benefits, which cost the state nothing.
Exactly.
Cost the state nothing.
Money that's sitting there and
available.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
$14 to $28 million of benefits if we do everything right and get the word out to young people that will be available to young people. No Minnesotan, no legislator, no government official, nobody should be upset about young people winning this lawsuit because we all benefit and Minnesota benefits from young people having extra bread in their pocket, as you so eloquently said in your opening.
Right. And it's one of those things that, on the dark side of education, we talk about all of these narratives that are out there that just sort of keep our education system stuck. Right. And one of those narratives is poverty. Right. And when I think about the fact that the state would not just say, hey, this is the right thing to do, right? They didn't have that interpretation, right? But then at the same time, they'll say, well, we need to end poverty before we fix education. But this is an example of thousands of children who, like you said, are the breadwinners, who might be taking care of siblings, taking care of their parents, and they were left hanging. But this ruling comes in, and you started to talk about the benefits earlier. And I posted a link for y'all in the comments. So if you see the link in there, check it out. Youth Prize has the unemployment information on there. But tell us a little bit more about the benefits and what folks need to do to make this happen, Marcus.
Sure. One quick thing on the education note. So for young people in high school, guess what the alternative is if they wanted benefits before we won this lawsuit? The alternative is to drop out of high school to receive benefits to provide for your family. So folks concerned about education, young people staying connected to education, should be terribly disturbed by the fact that we put our young people in a predicament where they had to choose between getting benefits to sustain their housing, their food, their livelihoods, and dropping out of school. So I just want to leave that with you. But yeah, so it's estimated that there's about $14 to $28 million available for young people based on the number of young workers we have and the amounts of PUA benefits and the eligible benefit. But the big issue is they have to apply to preserve their right to benefit. They have to go to that Deed's website, despite what it says, and go in and apply for benefits. And I feel very confident, even though the website has not changed, we have worked our angles. We've been in conversation with folks that will preserve their right to benefits and that the website will change. One of the issues that we have is that because of the court, and this is credit to the Minnesota Court of Appeals, because of the time-sensitive nature of this, they issued an order without a full opinion. So we have the order knowing that young people are entitled to these benefits, so we're working on the full opinion. And I don't believe that Deed will in any way go against this ruling in terms of appeal as it relates to high school students receiving benefits. I think there may be some concern about a broader order that may apply to other groups. So we need to get our young people, our young workers, our youngest, our lowest paid, our most racially and ethnically diverse cohort of workers to that website to apply for the benefits they're entitled to. So I think you posted the link to our website. We help. We're trying to help make things easier. We have a short FAQ. We have some links to the Deed website so that you can go in there and you can apply. We're doing a lot through social media. We're getting billboards out, but we need your help. Anybody on social media, go to our social media. Please share the information. We need as many young people to receive these benefits as possible. A lot of young people did a lot of work over the last 8 months leading to ensure that young people have this opportunity to receive this. And we want to make sure we make good on that and that they get the benefits they deserve.
And I also just popped the number to the governor's office, right? Call the governor, y'all. Make the calls. We have to make this happen, right? As I mentioned earlier, Marcus, you correct me if I'm wrong, but if this money isn't accessed and the applications aren't in, there's a cutoff for this money. Is that correct?
December 25th is the cutoff. And I see in the chat, someone said, will they get retroactive PUA? Yes, yes, yes. But they have to apply before December 25th. And we want them to apply within the next week. We don't want to wait till December 24th. We don't want to wait till December 25th. We want you to, as soon as possible, to apply for these benefits.
That's what's up. That's what's up.
Yep. So if you lost your job in April, you're a young person, and you found, even if you struggled for a little bit and found a new job, if there were a period where you lost some wages due to COVID, you need to go in and apply.
Hey, that's what's up. And
those
you got my word, our partnership at Minnesota Parent Union, that we'll do everything we can to get the word out, right?
Appreciate you.
I thank you for coming on this morning. Like I said, it's crazy that we even have to talk about something like this, but I'm glad y'all's partnering with the youth. We'll see you soon, brother. Appreciate you.
Well, thank you for lifting this up and keep doing what you're doing, fighting for equity and justice in education.
Yes, sir. Have a good day, Marcus.
You too.
So there you have it, y'all, right? That's Minnesota for you. And we talk about how Minnesota nice we are, but we're leaving our children stranded. I mean, just stranded with no support. And I'll tell you, it's not easy to go against the system, right? It's not easy to put yourself out there on the front lines fighting for justice. But they made it happen. And now you always hear me talk about how many nonprofits we have here in Minnesota. Now it's time for us to do our jobs. It's time for the nonprofits to step up and make sure we do our best to get the information out there. I know the business community is stepping up for the youth. We all have to step up, right? Because this is the system that our children have to live in, right? We think of, all of the issues that we've been dealing with since the beginning of COVID, right? When it comes to education, those issues have been there. And now, on top of not providing the youth an education, you're also saying, well, you've been working, you've been paying your taxes, but we don't care, right? Figure it out. So make sure that you make the call to the governor's office. Make sure that you email. Make sure that you spread the word. Every young person that you know, get them this information, right? And Cole Stevens is one of the high school students who's been working on this. And I'm glad you're tuning in, Cole. Keep informing people in the comments, right? Cole says, shouldn't even have to sue to get support for youth, right? And I'll tell you, Cole, most folks watching this show who are going to see your comment agree with you 1,000%. Man, I'll tell you this, Cole. Sometimes you wake up happy to fight another day. Some days you wake up and you're thankful that other folks are fighting the fight. So thank you, Cole, Lincoln, Walter. I know you all been grinding. So gratitude, y'all. Gratitude. So what we got here, right? We're distance learning is still going on. And I don't know about y'all's children, our children across the country, wherever you at, but distance learning just seems to get just worse and worse by the day, right? Every day there's a new story about how low expectations for our children are leading to, what we talked about a couple of weeks ago, where you have a bunch of high school students failing most of their courses, being failed. And this past week, I was in a meeting, a Zoom, everything's Zoom, of course, y'all know that. I was in this meeting and I heard somebody mention the soft bigotry of low expectations. And before that meeting, I was talking with a group of teachers from around the metro, and they were describing what I felt were low expectations. They were describing how at the beginning of COVID, students in their schools were instructed that they didn't have to get onto the Zooms or the Google Meets. They didn't have to participate. And now fast forward to last week, teachers were talking about how zero, no exaggeration, 0 students were showing up to their class. So when you think about, what George Bush coined back then in 2000, let me back up a little bit, right? So the soft bigotry of low expectation, that's not something that I came up with. I think bigotry is bigotry, but I get the point, right? And back in 2000, George W. Bush was invited to speak at an NAACP event. You know what the NAACP is? I don't even know. No, I'm just playing. But he was invited to speak at an NAACP event. And during his speech, he talked about the soft bigotry of low expectations. So when I was having the conversation with the teachers, and a couple of days later, this soft bigotry of low expectations popped up in this other conversation, it just made me think about all of the white saviors. And I'll just say all of the saviors here in Minnesota. The saviors who enter our schools, and these ones I'm talking about, they're not from the neighborhood. They're from a place where, you know, they usually see children who look like me on TV, in a movie, on the news or something like that. But when I thought about our education system here in Minnesota, it's filled with low expectations of our children. Low expectations of families. Right? I can't tell you how many times I've heard a teacher or school leader say something like this. Well, you know, they have a lot going on in their life. Right? That was their excuse to let Tyrone sleep through the entire class. Right? That was their excuse as to why they didn't give mom and dad the news that Tyrone can't read, or give mom and dad the tools to help Tyrone learn how to read at home. And the fact of the matter is, y'all, Tyrone is brilliant, despite all that he might be going through. Tyrone's mama and daddy are brilliant, despite all they might be going through. And when I used to work in the schools, right, and you see some teachers that know how to do this, but then there's a lot that don't, right? But we need teachers and school leaders to not just feel sorry for Tyrone and Tyrone's family, right? Because all of those years of feeling sorry has helped us here in Minnesota. It's led us to the worst education gaps in the country, right? It's led us to the educational chaos that we are experiencing today, right? There are schools today, y'all, where more than 70% aren't even logging into their classes. Not because their internet is janky, not because their laptop is broken, but because they don't have to. Because people feel so sorry for them. And I know y'all might be saying, right, yeah. The digital divide is real. And so is the belief gap, right? So is the narrative that in order for Black children, Indigenous children, brown children to be taught how to read, we have to end poverty. What a crock, what a just poor excuse for why so many children of color and low-income white children in Minnesota can't read. All right, the same people who are saying we can't teach children how to read until we end poverty are the same people pushing welfare programs that lock families into poverty, or are the same people that are telling our children, as you just heard from Marcus, that if you want these benefits, well, you better drop out. You want to get this change here that you need to pay your bills, that you need to take care of your mama, your daddy, your siblings. Well, you better drop out. So this narrative around poverty and trauma, I really believe, has led us to a point where, especially now during COVID, right? It's just sort of exposed this, but it's led us to a point where there are almost zero expectations for children of color and low-income children. And if you look at the data, right, you'll see that the poverty narrative, the trauma narrative, it doesn't hold up. You look at the data, you'll see it gets deeper than that, right? You'll see that white children who live in poverty are actually being educated better than Black and brown children who aren't living in poverty. So you have a middle class Black child. You have a middle class Latine child. Our schools are doing worse for those students than they are poor white children. So think about that, right? What's really going on there, y'all? Does the poverty narrative not apply to white children? I mean, poverty is poverty, right? What's really going on is that soft bigotry, right? We think of bigotry and racism and all of that stuff. We think of that sometimes through one lens, right? When people think of racism, racist, they think of the Klan members walking around with their hoods on. If they think of bigotry, they think of things like, well, you're from this country or you practice this faith, so you're not welcome here. Go back to where you came from. But when you think about this soft bigotry, when you think about the low expectations, it starts with those narratives, but it's carried out, it's perpetuated by adults. And I could take this time to just sort of lay into all of the ineffective teachers out there. But I know that over this past week, I've had questions from teachers who I would consider effective. Teachers who are teaching our children how to read. And one of the big questions that I got this week, a teacher in Minneapolis, she said, do you think that we have set our kids up for failure this year? And I said, well, what do you mean? And she said, well, I've been making calls since the beginning of the school year. I've been trying to make sure that, my students have what they need. But when I look at the grade book for our entire school, it doesn't look good. And I said, well, how many of the teachers in your school building are thinking like you? Then I think about some Zooms I've been on with teachers who seem to be doing fine from their cabins, their lake cabins, great backgrounds. You know how most of us in our Zooms, we got to put that fake background. But I've been seeing a lot of these recordings, a lot of these meetings where, teachers are sitting there with their feet kicked up, nice, log cabin. And they're talking about how bad life must be for what they call poor children. How bad life must be because of COVID for all of these poor little Black and brown kids. And when I hear that, I start to think about experiences that I had as a child growing up in our public education system. I always think about how I was treated because I had learned how to read, because I could do my schoolwork, compared to how some of my classmates were treated. And when I think about the level of expectation that has to be required in order for our children not just to survive, y'all, but in order for them to thrive, we're not there yet. So teachers ask, well, what can we do? And unfortunately, it might be too late to do something. It might be too late to try and go back and correct years of a failing system. So what we do is set up the system that we feel should be in place going forward. What we do is, when it comes to expectations of that system as well as our children, and this one gets tricky, right? People say, oh, we got to, treat people how you want to be treated, right? I think, you got to treat people how they want to be treated. But when it comes to expectations in our schools, we have to hold our children in those school buildings to the same expectations that we would want our children to be held to, right? We have to. But then folks say, well, how can you do that if you don't come from these children's community? How can I be truly an advocate and not a savior if I don't know my children? I don't come from the same background. Well, you have to build that relationship, right? Now, relationships aren't everything. Love isn't everything, right? We've talked about that before. You ain't loving our children if you're not teaching them how to read, but you have to build that relationship, right? I want to ask y'all something. When you were younger, back in your K-12 experience, and I know for some of y'all, you might have to think way back. No, just kidding. But think to that experience and how you felt in that school environment, right? I remember in 8th grade. Now, from 2nd grade through 7th grade, I went to this school called Capitol Hill. It was quote unquote gifted and talented. We had to take a test to get in there. And on the first day of school in there, you could feel that you were in an environment where you were expected to do well. I stayed in that environment through 7th grade. 7th grade, I remember saying to my grandma, because kids in my neighborhood were like, oh, you go to the white school. You got to come to our school. You got to come to Murray. So I told my grandma, I said, hey, I want to go over here to Murray, be with my friends. I don't want them to think, I'm a sellout because I go to this white school. So my grandma, she always wanted me to learn whatever lesson was there to learn. So she said, okay, transferred over to Murray. And this is a school in St. Paul Public Schools. And I remember at Murray in the first week of class, I went into math class. And I remember this class. We had Mr. DeBruzzi. I think it was Chad DeBruzzi or something like that. This guy, white guy, in the front of a classroom of about 15 black or brown children. The rest were white children. This was the first time that I had experienced in a classroom just real segregation. The folks that Mr. DeBruzzi expected to do well, going back to that, front row, the folks that he expected to do well every day had a seat in the front row. The rest of us who he just, hoped that we wouldn't be getting in trouble, he put us in the back 3 rows of the classroom. And I remember for the whole first week, there wasn't one time that Mr. DeBruzzi asked any of us in the back of the classroom if we had the answer to a question. I remember my grade was bad in that course, probably a D. And I described to my grandmother what was going on in math class, right? My grandma was upset. I had done pretty well in math to that point, but my grandma was upset to see that D because she had higher expectations. She not only had higher expectations of me, but also of that school. And I remember telling her, like, Grandma, I promise you, if we miss something in the first 10 minutes of class because everybody in the back is talking, he doesn't go back over it. Or do you ask questions? But yeah, but he doesn't call on us. So when you think about your own classroom experience, did you experience that? Did you have times where, because the expectation was low, you felt like there was no other choice but to meet that low expectation? When I was a youngster, I was, labeled EBD, like most Black kids who, are bored in class, need to be challenged. They don't label us, they don't call us dyslexic. We EBD, emotional behavior disorder. And obviously I had some things I was working through as a kid. But as an EBD student, I remember being in this special education program, right? It was called Eisenmenger back then. I think they've gotten rid of it and given it a new name, and new seclusion rooms and things like that. But I remember being in this program, and there were things. I was going to tell you all a story, but I'm going to save that story. I would never say that story publicly. But I remember things that would happen in this Eisenmenger program. Things like people would fight, people would knock over chairs, things like that. But what didn't happen ever was anything around academics. What we talked about in those classes were how bad our communities were, how much the crime kept us from doing X, Y, and Z. Now, those conversations are valuable with folks who have an understanding of what we're going through, but they're not valuable when those conversations are meant to excuse holding children who don't look like you to high expectations. Now, if you think of the teacher makeup here in Minnesota, it's about 90% white women, I believe, 94% white, and the rest, it's broken up between the different groups. But one of the things that we just love up here in Minnesota is this idea that it's all about love, right? It's all about, checking the boxes of the trainings, the diversity, equity, inclusion, right? But when you look at what those types of trainings have led to, it hasn't been the change that we're looking for. And earlier I said, hey, I could just lay in to all of the teachers that walk through the classroom doors with low expectations, all of the teachers that log into the Zooms from their cabins with low expectations of our children. But I think we have an opportunity here, y'all. I think we have an opportunity to raise our expectations, not only of our children, right? Because there's a fine line. It's sort of this balancing act we have to do, right? And I just say it's keeping it real from every angle. Yes, there's poverty. Yes, there's trauma. But those aren't reasons to say, hey, I'm not going to hold Rashad to the highest expectations, right? When you look at that makeup that I described, it's easier to understand that there are going to be some gaps in understanding, that there are going to be some folks who, because of their own experience, might look at Tyrone in a certain way. But when that happens, and I'm talking to, I know there's teachers watching, teachers listening. When that happens, what do you do next, right? When those low expectations set in, how do you correct that? How are you currently correcting that? So when we think about expectations, we think about the fact that, here in Minnesota, across the Twin Cities, across the state, there are a bunch of schools where 4 out of 5 kids can't read. We think about the narratives out there around testing, even around reading. Where are our children in those narratives? Where are the actual children who are on your Zooms? Are you thinking about them as you're thinking about your own expectations? Or are you entering this situation from a mindset that says, hey, I'm white, I'm right, follow me? So when you think about, where do your low expectations of our children come from? Right? Because one of the things that, and I'll say this is getting better, more and more folks are starting to realize that, like, yeah, we can change these systems together. So more and more teachers are starting to step up. But when you think about where the expectations for our children come from, they start at the top. And if you think about what that cycle is usually like for teachers who want to be administrators, they put in a few years in the classroom, they shift on over to that admin role, and now their thinking, their belief system is passed down to their staff. I'll give you an example. In that Eisenmenger program I was telling you about, and this might have been a little bit beyond that, but we used to have this teacher named Mike Sadomka. It's a good guy back then. That's what we thought. Mr. Sadomka would chop it up with us, check in on us, make us laugh with us. But when I think about Mr. Sadomka's expectations of us as Black and brown children in that special education class, it's hard for me to find any high expectations. Then I think about, Mr. Sadomka, he became a principal. And when I go look at data of his time as a principal, whether it's the suspension data, whether it's reading and math data, grades, I sort of got, a light bulb that went off. Right? Here's the same guy who had low expectations of us when we were in high school. And now those expectations, he's carried on into his admin role. The work that needs to be done, it's not going to come from a training. It's going to come from folks putting that mirror up and really starting to dive deep into the thoughts that we have in our head around Black and brown children. That's what it's going to take. There hasn't been one courageous conversation that has changed the outcomes or changed the trajectory for our children. Not one. So the real work that has to be done is understanding where you fit in to Tyrone's life. How you build that relationship to where Tyrone knows, hey, I'm not waking you up in the middle of class from your slumber because I think you're not tired. I'm waking you up because I want you to have a chance. We have to give our children a chance. Yes, there's poverty. Yes, there's trauma. But did the fact that, my father was killed when I was 2 mean that I shouldn't be taught how to read? Did the fact that, during some of my time with my mom, we had to stay in a shelter with 2 beds in a little tiny ass space, did that mean that I shouldn't be taught how to read? Absolutely not, right? Did that mean that the expectations for me should be super low? Absolutely not. It also didn't mean that my teachers had to completely understand what it felt like to live in a shelter, to, be there for me. We get after the systems, y'all. We get after the systems. And I'm always reminded by one of my good friends. She always says, we are the system. We are the system, y'all. So how big of a bigot are you? How big of a bigot are you? And it's hard to talk about these things. I know it can be difficult, but we have to. And it's not a conversation to have in isolation, right? Yes, it starts with putting that mirror up, but it's a conversation that you have to have in concert with your colleagues. I always say, you walk into a school building, the teachers in that building know who the ineffective teachers are. The teachers in that building know who don't really care about our children. And it's when those same teachers who can recognize those things, it's when they start to stand up, speak up. That's when we start to get somewhere. So as you're thinking about distance learning and how bad it's been, how many students aren't showing up to your class, don't cry about it. Figure out the solutions. And if part of that solution is starting at a point where you can identify all of the ways that you hold your students to low expectations, all of the ways that you hold your students of color and indigenous students to lower expectations than you hold your white students, maybe that's where you have to start. But if we don't raise expectations for ourselves, there's no way we can raise expectations for our children. And there's no way, with the help, I'll say that with the help of the public education system, that our children are going to have a chance. Right? We're nearing the end of 2020. And I said this early in the week, it's hard for me to even keep up with what day it is. And that's no joke. But the one thing that this COVID and being stuck at home, stuck in the office, wherever you're stuck at, the one thing that has allowed for is a lot more time for us to get prepared, a lot more time for us to get the information, get organized, and take action. There's all types of narratives out there, y'all. All types of narratives that we get, socialized into. One of those narratives is like, well, hey, we just, if you be nice to the kids, that's all that matters, right? If you just love the kids, that, you've won. We have to unpack those narratives. We have to start to think about how those narratives are specifically impacting our children of color, specifically impacting low-income white children. That's the informed part. We have to get organized and we have to take action. And it's like we've been lacking on the action because everything is going on just as folks expect it to be going on. It's a free-for-all right now, y'all. Every human being for themselves. Every family for themselves. And who's that impacting the most? Same folks it's always impacted. These narratives, y'all. I say it's killing us. I mean, it's real. Let me get to some of these comments for a minute here, just to chop it up with y'all. Cooley, what you talking about out there? Cooley, a Pringle, family advocate, soon to be director, huh? We stepping the game up. Cooley says the teachers that speak up, they get fired because they notice it before they get tenured and cannot speak up. That's a true conspirator. And you're right, Cooley. It's one thing I love about Cooley is that she always gonna say it how it is, right? But when you think about, like, yes, there is a lot of that, right? There's a lot of that retaliation. So we have to strategize. Yep, we got to be smart about it. But the one thing I always think about is like, oh yeah, and I cut my hair. That blonde shit is gone. But the one thing I always think about is just like the why, right? Why are we doing what we're doing? Right? We didn't launch Minnesota Parent Union just so we could always like have a job. We launched Minnesota Parent Union to change the system, right? To make sure that families, parents, students, right, our children are front and center at the table when decisions are being made. And if that's what we are in service for, then that's what we have to do. And Cooley would tell you, by any means necessary. So, of course, there's sacrifice. Of course, you have to go against the grain, and it's not easy, right? Cooley will tell you, every day, there's somebody coming at Cooley. There's somebody coming at the work that we're doing at Minnesota Parent Union. But we keep grinding. So for the teachers who don't have tenure, but you're recognizing these issues, link up with us, right? But even if you don't link up with us, stand up for those children. Don't worry about your job. Go to some of these other. I think we got a teacher right here. I always love when teachers are comment. Jesse, good morning. But Jesse says, raise expectations of teachers. The teacher evaluation process is a joke. I agree. And that's the thing with this education system, right? And that's why I love that, Jesse's one of the leaders that, supports our work at Minnesota Parent Union. But that's why I love when teachers can call out the things that, regular old folks who aren't a part of the system, who don't have that information, might not know that, right? But when teachers get evaluated, I remember back in White Bear Lake, there was this teacher, and it was a good teacher actually, so it didn't really, it wasn't a big of a deal. But the teacher eval was simply the principal coming in there for like 5 minutes, looked around the classroom, he left out. Teacher got a perfect score. All right, so teacher eval, Jesse might say, or other teachers might say, well, those evals are really about who the principal likes or who the admin likes, all right? But if we're not evaluating teachers in a way that help teachers grow, what are we saying? What are we expecting then? Here goes Tamara right here. I like this one. One of the best things you can do for a child with trauma, teach them to read. And it seems like a no-brainer, right? Teach us how to read, and that will get us where we're going. I'll tell you like this. I know there were teachers who, along my journey, just thought they knew I was going to be a failure. They knew it. And I could feel it. But I remember one day, this woman, older black woman, Miss Lynn Wright. She said to me, she said, hey, Rashad, you keep acting a fool like that, that's what they want you to do. They want to put you in that timeout room every time they can. And guess what's happening when you're in that timeout room? All of the other kids are learning, and you're not learning nothing. So it's like, you want to be helpful. Teach us how to read. Thank you, Tamara. What else we got up in here? Y'all be getting these comments cracking. I ain't even looking over here. But, hey, y'all, it's 11:06. I got some work to do. I know y'all probably got some work to do. Next week, we're going to dive into standardized testing a little bit. All right. It's one of the narratives that's been surfacing up here in Minnesota over these past couple of weeks, coming from the teachers' unions, is that, you know, our children shouldn't have to take the test this year. There shouldn't be any accountability, right? We shouldn't know how things are going. The tests are racist. So next week, I'm going to bring on some folks from the Minnesota Parent Union team. We're going to talk about some things that we have coming up in January in partnership with Pearson, where we can dive into that standardized testing a little bit more. And I know there's folks out there like, oh, Rashad, y'all's tripping, partnering with Pearson, blah, 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 blah. I know. But I'll tell you like this, right? The narratives around testing up in here in Minnesota have been going on for years. We have a strong contingency of anti-testers who have been telling children, don't take the test is racist. Going back to something I said earlier, it's easy to be pissed off. In this case, teachers' unions are pissed off because the tests show us how well or not schools are doing. But it's easy for the teachers' unions to create that awareness, but they've brought no solutions. So we're bringing families together for some listening sessions. We're bringing Pearson in to do a presentation. Then we're going to have a family-led panel discussion. And we're going to tell you all about that and more of the action. It's going to be Action Sunday next week. This is the Dark Side of Education. I'm Rashad Turner. I appreciate y'all tuning in. Remember, quality is a must. Failure is not an option. Peace.